The killing machine that is Indominus 3.0, Goji Centre's hybrid monstrosity, able to take on anything in existence. Or so they thought. They said this upgraded version of the hybrid dinosaur Indominus Rex was nigh on unbeatable. Well, that's not entirely true, and I have the proof to back this up. And not only that, there's a horrifying monster that could actually take this down. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You see, I'm a massive fan of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, exactly like Goji. And clearly, when they made the Indominus Rex 3.0, they're using Jurassic World's logic. They're using their hybrid theory. Hell, they're even using their own dinosaurs, so clearly set in the world of Jurassic World. But then they try and ground it with some realism, and we're going to try and do exactly the same thing to debunk this Indominus Rex 3.0 as not being the top predator, because that title belongs to someone else. But first off, let's look at the makeup of the Indominus Rex 3.0 compared to the original. And before we go any further, I'd like to say I'm a huge fan of their channel, and this for me was something I couldn't resist doing, and it's just a friendly bit of fun. So don't take this serious, guys. I don't have beef with Goji. Now, immediately you might be thinking that's the Endo 2.0. Well, in Goji's own words, they don't upgrade it. The 3.0 is exactly the same as the 2.0. They don't believe it needs upgrading. But comparing the original and the 2.0/3.0, you'll notice a stark contrast. It's missing several dinosaurs. In fact, the 2.0 has only 9 species of genome, where the original actually has 13. They decided to take out the Therizinosaurus, the Deinosuchus, the Giga, the Carno, the Rugops, and the Majungasaurus, and replaced it with great ape, the Saurophaganax, short-tailed shrew, dwarf crocodile, and a whip-tailed lizard, believing it to be the upgraded version. Well, I'm telling you now, that isn't going to be the case. Well, these changes actually has led to its downfall. You see, removing them genomes has now made the genome of the Indominus 3.0 just under 70% small animal. The only large animals now in its genome are the Tyrannosaurus and the Saurophaganax, and we can't just rely on that small portion to make up the huge animal which they're displaying as the Indominus. Well, the Indominus 3.0. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, the size of the Indominus 3.0 can come from the T-Rex or the Saurophaganax, right? Well, wrong. You see, the size of the original Indominus came from the Giganotosaurus DNA, you know, the one that Goji has now removed. The Tyrannosaurus genome was for the bite force, and that carries over into the new Indominus 3.0. They've used the Saurophaganax clearly for its teeth, the serrated jaws. So the size of this animal is coming from where exactly? Not great ape, velociraptor, or any other of the small short-tailed shrews, dwarf crocodile, which is the smallest crocodile in the world, by the way. The size of that Indominus Rex isn't accurate by the logic we're using. In fact, the likelihood is it'd probably be around the size of a velociraptor. And it's exactly like Dr. Wu says.
You cannot have an animal with exaggerated predator features without the corresponding behavioral traits.
So let's give the Indom 3.0 a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and say it was slightly bigger than the velociraptor. Because you've got to remember, 70% of this genome is made up of small animals. So the 30% of the T-Rex and the Saurophaganax are not going to off-put that. But what about all the other perks of the animals they've put in? Surely the traits of these dinosaurs and animals will outweigh the original Indominus Rex. You see, they have given them great ape DNA that would enable them to have basic problem-solving skills, be able to have ambidextrous hands/thumbs, potentially enabling them to use tools, right? But you gotta remember, this Indominus 3.0 is no longer the massive killing machine. In fact, it's several times smaller than the original. So them great ape arms we can see on there wouldn't be all that big. They wouldn't even have them claws. Sure, they'd be quite muscular, but they wouldn't have them claws on the end of it. But we can say that comes from the velociraptor. Makes sense. But having the strengths of one animal also means you have its weaknesses, and great apes, believe it or not, have terrible immunity to human pathogens, particularly stuff like influenza, stuff like the common cold, and it's actually devastating to great apes. That's one drawback. And not only that, great apes are hugely social animals. They live in, big societies, and they have a tendency to absolutely hate other members of their groups. So you imagine this Indominus 3.0 has been brought up in isolation, very much like the original Indominus Rex, but now you've added great ape DNA in there, which is a highly social animal. The chances are it's going to go berserk, turn into some type of sociopath, worse than the original Indominus Rex. So now, mentally, it's probably in a state way worse than the Scorpius Rex. Couple it with the T-Rex Rex's poor eyesight, and the pit viper DNA, enabling it to see in infrared, the infrared it sees, because of the poor Tyrannosaurus Rex DNA, is going to be all over the place. So not only is it now several times smaller, mentally it's unstable, and it's got a huge weakness to basic human diseases. Now I know you could say that the short-tailed shrew has a great immunity to pull out poisons, etc. That's why Goji put it in there. It can neutralize the poison of any type of dinosaur or animal, right? That is correct. But the short-tailed shrew, exactly like a dwarf crocodile, exactly like the whip-tailed lizard, which are all added into this genome, also have a huge weakness to the human pathogens. Meaning, all I have to do is literally sneeze on the Indominus 3.0. It's going to catch my cold and likelihood die off because of that. That's one main weakness, but in a stand-up fight, doesn't really mean an awful lot. The Indor 3.0 is probably still going to rip me limb from limb before I even get close. But I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about other dinosaurs and animals. And the animal I think is going to beat it, I will reveal at the end, but let's continue comparing it with the real Indominus Rex. Because as it stands, we've learned that it's several times smaller, which could play a huge factor in the battle, and it has a huge weakness to human pathogens. But I haven't talked about pit vipers yet, or the other several genomes they added in. A prime example here is the dwarf crocodile genome they added in. They wanted the dwarf crocodile genome, presumably for the armor plating it has, right? But again, given its size, makes perfect sense. The dwarf crocodile has great armor plating relative to its size. But it's also the smallest crocodile in the world. And not only that, it has a non-aggressive nature. This dwarf croc doesn't go out and attack anyone. In fact, it's far more passive than any other crocodile we know. So you now build this into the Indominus Rex. It has conflicting emotions. You have the Tyrannosaurus Rex genome, which is likely a high predator, aggressive. It now conflicts with the dwarf crocodile, non-aggressive. This Endos 3.0 mind is all over the place. It's probably conflicting with itself. This would mean that the likelihood is during battle, the Indominus 3.0 would 100% be hesitating to attack or even stop outright during their attack, giving the opposition chance to turn around the battle or strike without any resistance. But we're not done there. They also added the whip-tailed lizard in. Again, that's presumably because the whip-tailed lizard can regenerate cells. I mean, the whip-tailed lizard drops its tail, literally cuts it off and is able to regenerate it. But you imagine doing that in a battle with the original Indominus Rex. You've now just lost your counterweight. You know, the tail is obviously used to counter the weight of the animal to ensure it isn't top heavy. Lost its ability to use the tail as an attacking mechanism. And not only that, the whip-tailed lizard, when it drops its tail, requires significant energy and resources, making it extremely vulnerable after it does so. Coupled with the dwarf crocodile's non-aggressive nature, it could pop its tail off in a defensive mechanism to try and get away, but in doing so, the original Indominus would just launch a full flurry of attacks. Now, especially with it being so small, the likelihood is it could easily find itself in an extremely difficult situation with the original Indominus. Now, that's not to say it could lose, because just because it's smaller doesn't mean it's any less deadly. Look at the indoraptor, for example. Because let's not forget the Saurophaganax, which has been added in. I'm sorry if I'm butchering that name, by the way. The teeth of that dinosaur are like serrated saws. So if it does manage to get a hold of you with the bite force from the Tyrannosaurus Rex, it could easily shred through armor and skin like no one's business, regardless of the size. So it's definitely open to cause some serious damage to whatever it sets its mind to. But that's the case here, whatever it sets its mind to. We know immediately from some of the genomes here, they're non-aggressive, some of them are defensive, and its mind is completely all over the place. Coupled with the poor vision from the Tyrannosaurus, it's going to have a difficult time here. Not to mention the loss of size because of all the genomes taken out of it. They've literally removed the Giganotosaurus, which is the one which gave it its huge size in the original Jurassic World Indominus. So in removing that, removes its size. They didn't replace the genome to replace the size. Now that's not to say that it's not dangerous, because we know it is extremely dangerous. It just puts it at a huge disadvantage. So what then could possibly completely decimate this Indominus 3.0? Well, for that, there's a common theme throughout all the new genomes and the old ones. Let's look at the natural predator list. Great ape. The natural predator to a great ape is weakness to humans. The pit viper, again, has a natural weakness to humans. The dwarf croc, you guessed it, a weakness to humans. Or what about the whiptail lizard? You've guessed it, a weakness to humans. Now that is not the human pathogens, I just mean a general weakness to humans. Deforestation, weapons, poaching, hunting for meat. And you now couple this with a new strain of dinosaur, a mutant hybrid, something which would be unstoppable, something which I've theorized on the channel before, something which finally utilizes the human intelligence. The most deadliest thing on the planet, that is humans. And just like Owen Grady says,
I would have a word with your people in the lab. That thing out there, that's no dinosaur.
That's right, you picture this in a lab. Human DNA fused with other genomes, which I'm not going to reveal today, because I believe that could be a video in itself if people want to see the showdown of the GX Rex versus Goji Centre's Indominus 3.0. And who knows, maybe I'll even make a series out of it. I'd also like to say a massive thanks to Goji for obviously making the original video. Without that, this wouldn't be possible. And I don't even need to tell you to go and check them out, because the likelihood is you're already subscribed. I just wanted to put my own 2 pence in there and have a bit of fun. And that's all this is, a bit of fun. Because they're simply amazing creators. And if you enjoyed this and want to see more, let me know in the comments. Do you want me to continue this and have more fun with it? Do you want to see the GX Rex? Please let me know. And if enough of you say yeah, then I'll make it. So make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for that video and all the upcoming news on Jurassic World REBIRTH, all Jurassic World lore, and not to mention all the mysteries of Jurassic Park and World, such as what was in the restricted section. I highly recommend checking them out. Massive thanks to the members who are on screen now. You guys keep the power on in the park. With extra mentions to DVM Wannabe 1018, Hammer Time, and our Jurassic CEO Joseph Frost's Ghost. And welcoming our newest members, SWAT Dude My Guy, Sarah Russell, and ABCD. Welcome. And if you happen to spot this GX Rex out in the wild, could your day get any worse? You bet Jurassic can. Catch you later.